Welcome back to the Fullerton College Pre-Press class. This is Professor Ben Hewitt in part 4 of our talk on PDF output. It's been a bit grueling for me. I don't know about you guys listening, but it's a lot of detail and a lot of menus. But we're finally on to something that's actually pretty useful. So let's get into this one now. We're going to talk about gradients and smooth shading. It turns out that most of the time that you create a gradient in graphics applications, it doesn't actually create a gradient. It creates the illusion of a gradient, not actually a gradient itself. It only tricks you into seeing one. Old Illustrator used to do this. New Illustrator is better. Creative Cloud, even the more recent CS 4, 5, 6, those all do actual gradients. But Illustrator 8, which was a pre-Creative Suite Illustrator, did not create real gradients. Neither does Freehand, CorelDRAW, or PowerPoint. I know. Hopefully you're cringing too, because you do sometimes get projects that were made on PowerPoint and they're not really meant to print, not really, but sometimes that's what they're paying you to do. Anyways, let's take a look at what they actually do. They use something called PS3, which has nothing to do with PlayStations. So PS level 3 smooth shading. So they're using a PS operator that they call smooth shading on this thing. It is an improved blend, but it's not a real blend. So instead of actually creating a real gradient where it starts at one color and blends to the next color, in fact, it's giving you the illusion of doing that by creating hundreds of individual, very slightly changed colors and putting them next to each other. If your range of change is within 256 or less, it will look smooth. If it's more than 256, you're going to have a bad time. And you're going to see bands and lines start to appear because it just won't have enough variants to show you. It'll have to make a variant by mixing two lines next to each other. And you'll start to see lines that look out of place because it's trying to use only 256. You know that number keeps popping up because it's an important computer number. An 8-bit system uses 256 bytes of data. So, or can do up to that value. So your 8-bit system here is able, which is pretty common for color, especially on older systems, to be 8-bit. That's going to only allow so much color information, and you're going to have to be able to fit the entire gradient within those 256 shades. If not, it's going to have problems. I'll have to zoom in on this for you. A picture of what that looks like if you don't use smooth shading and the application's blended it using the old method. I don't know if you can see this very well on here. Let's zoom in. Basically, this is not a smooth gradient, but it's a bunch of very, very thin lines. Oops, sorry. A bunch of lines that go through, and each line is a slightly different color. If you zoom in enough, you might be able to see them in the purple over here, although I don't know if that's going to show. Actually, you can see a banding thing there in the final output of this video. So if it doesn't, I'm sorry. So that is not smooth shading. That's the PS3 version of shading. If you get a smooth shade, you can now see it's a single box rather than a bunch of small pieces trying to look like they're one piece. It actually is a single object, and the object has a real gradient applied. Okay, other advanced settings you want for press quality PDFs. Preserve overprint settings is important. That allows CMYK colors to overprint. Overprinting is very important if you're using black text on top of a colored background, or worse, on top of a photograph, which is a common practice these days. Overprinting means that you print it on top of the other colors. It's most commonly used for black and most commonly used for black text. That means that if you're printing a picture, CMY, that the text is part of the K separation, but it also prints on top of whatever else is underneath. That way there's no gaps where it doesn't quite line up. The opposite of overprint is called knockout. And knockout is when you remove the color behind the text to make sure that the text is the only thing printed on that spot. That would be done more commonly for something like a spot color text, because spot color is only guaranteed to look like that copyrighted Pantone tone if it's printed on white paper. If it's printed on top of a photograph, it's not going to be itself. So you knock out, you remove the background behind that text if it's Pantone to make the color correct. But if you're using black, it's not worth the risk of the misalignment. Instead, it's better just to print it on top. You'll always see it as black, even if it has a few other things underneath it. What's 20% of cyan between friends, right? Anyways, that's overprint. You can also save a copy of your settings inside the file. And it's also possible to save original JPEG images. This is rather important. If you save an original JPEG image, you don't resave it. Remember that anytime you resave or recompress a PDF, or it's not a PDF, I'm sorry, I said the wrong word. Anytime you resave or recompress a JPEG, you are causing damage to the image all over again, starting with the previous one. So it's best not to, if you don't have to, don't replace them, don't recompress. Allow it to use the original JPEGs. The fewer times that JPEG has been compressed, the better. Even if it's set to high quality, if you recompress a JPEG, you're taking an average of an average when you're making those average tiles. Document structuring conventions. This is stuff that can be seen to retain file information. You can also preserve EPS information if you want to have original info from the app that made it in the first place. You can also allow OPI comments if you're doing OPI workflows. Anyways, standards for press quality PDF. The PDF X1A is designed for CMYK workflows. The PDF X3 is meant for color manage, and you set it to fail when it's not able to comply. That means you're not going to get a non-usable PDF. You either get one that works or you don't get one at all. And if you're going for output to print, you don't want to output a kind of okay PDF that's flawed. You only want to output the ones that are actually going to work. X1A is also good for spot color. You can also make sure that your stuff's going to work somewhere else by sharing the PDF settings file. You can send the file of what the settings were that you made to make the file to the receiver so they're able to take a look at exactly what happened to make sure that theirs is going to work the same way. We're going to stop here for this video and come back for a separate one on how to make PDFs in particular applications. So there's going to be a lot of videos for this chapter, but they're not all as long as they normally are.